It's 99 years today for Raza Saab, and we are happy to celebrate his life with a show that we're doing at Akar Prakar. The show is named Dance of the Elements, and the text is by Ranjit Hoskote. And today we have with us Ashok Vajpeyi. Ashok ji has been a close friend and aid of Raza Saab. He needs no introduction. He's a poet and the managing trustee of the Raza Foundation, and the prime force behind Raza coming back to his country. We are so grateful to you, Ashok ji, for doing that. I met Ashok ji with Raza Saab in 2010, and that's when our relationship grew, and we were part of that movement when Raza came back to the country and we started to show his work. I would like Ashok ji to talk a little bit about his connection with Raza, especially in terms of not only his own art and as a person and the spirituality that Raza kind of stood for, but also the various elements that Ranjit so aptly talks about. There's music, there's dance, there is poetry, there is literature. And so Ashok ji, please tell us something about that.
Well, Raza was not only an artist, but also a very great Rasik who enjoyed life. In his case, the distance between living and painting had more or less disappeared. He lived to paint, and in a manner of speaking, painted to live. Now, one of the things that one must remember is that while he was part of the modernist movement, according to me, he took an alternative modernistic path. That path was of consonance, of tranquility, of peace and silence, of evocation. Unlike the main modernist work, which was tension and disruption and dislocation, etc. And this path he took had two consequences. One, that in his way of thinking, colors were not merely colors, but they were resonances. They were intimations. There were all kinds of addresses. And this led to him creating a very vibrant, very colorful spirituality. It is not the usual spirituality which is rooted or expressed through some specific symbols, ritualistic. No. His is a different path, and that path he took through poetry, music, and dance. What he did was, he used to think that just as in the Indian way of thinking there are Panchatattvas which constitute the world, constitute the universe, Kshiti, Jal, Pavak, Gagan, Samir. There were 5 colors which were the basic colors. And each color has not only a life, but a whole spectrum behind it. And therefore, his spirituality was not a spirituality of withdrawal, although it was meditative. It was not taking leave of the joys and pains of the world. It enjoyed things and other elements. So it was a joyful, meditative spirituality. And the joy came from words to start with. He is perhaps the only painter who had more than 100 canvases on which in Devanagari he has put a text.
That
These
reminds
are-
me of that "Maan jab ghar
Yeah,
aunga."
yeah. I mean,
Ghar laut ke aunga.
apart from my poems,
Yeah.
but there are others.
जी.
And there are sayings from Upanishads, from Kabir, from Tulsidas, from Surdas, from Meera, from Ghalib, from
Gandhi ji.
Mir, etc.
Yeah.
He was very fond of poetry, and his favorite poet was Rainer Maria Rilke, who was a great poet of silence. So for Raza, this colorful fury is deeply embedded in silence. So he moves into text, and therefore he puts the word and the color together. But one is not about the other. Each one is granted full autonomy. So the poem is not illustrated by the painting, nor the painting tries to overwhelm the poem.
Wow.
Both coexist in a meaningful dialogue, as it were. The second point is that his concept of spirituality and, in fact, artistic vision, his aesthetics, came out also from the world of music, the repetitive element that we have in our in classical music,
Also.
the avritti, the idea that there are circles and circles of sounds, and they surround each other, they cajole each other, they almost make love to each other, and yet they create an ambience in which things are pulsating. Now, this was another element in his art. He took to poetry and to music and to dance. We had an experiment. We had in Avignon a Kathak dance, Hindustani classical music, my poetry, and Raza's actual works being brought onto the stage. And we called it reaching for each other, which is a line from a French poet, Il Bonnefoy. This reaching for each other was another element that he very much liked, that we should be trying through art to reach each other, to touch each other, sometimes to resonate each other. Without the other, self cannot exist. Self must have the other around. At least for Raza, it was necessary that it should be around. And therefore he created an art which touches the elements, which had elements of musicality, rhythm, resonance. It has the assertion of the word, as it were, and it also has movement, like in dance. So things move, but they move in unison. They move in a pattern which has to be discerned carefully, attentively. Raza's art demands attention. It also requires reflection. It also forces you to deliberate about not only the meaning of art, but also, in some sense, meaning of life. That's what.
Yes, it's wonderful. You already talked about the colors he was using. You talked about music, sound, and the experiment, of course, of using dance. And this was in the year 1997, was it?
94, 95.
95 in France. It was one of the
festivals.
festivals.
Yeah. And mind you, in case of Raza, at one time, he told me in Paris, I used to go every year, twice, to spend some time, one summer and one winter with him. And he once told me that now I want to withdraw from color and I only want to paint in white. Which intrigued me very much because he was known to be a colorist.
Man of color, yes, of course, master of color.
When he came to India for good, he started painting almost from the second, third day. And once I asked him that whatever happened to your resolve to paint only the white? He says, well, I still get fascinated by the white, but I'm also equally drawn to colors.
And the black.
And the black.
Yes.
So I cannot possibly leave colors, because leaving colors would mean going into an emptiness, into a void. And I think I don't want to go into the void through my art. I'll go into the void when my life comes to an end.
Wonderful.
So it's that kind of a fascination for color. Not only fascination, I used to watch him paint because I had all the time under the sun, and here he had nothing to do except paint. He doesn't have to go anywhere.
I know he would wake up at 4 a.m. and start painting.
Mind you, in a period of 5 years, because the rest of the period was spent in the hospital, in 5 years, he painted more than 400 canvases. Other thing that I once reminded him was about Gandhi. Because he used to talk about Mahatma Gandhi quite a lot, and he used to feel very pained and hurt that India of today seemed to have forgotten Mahatma Gandhi and things like that. So when he was there one day, I told him, okay, you have been talking about Gandhi. Of course, you have never painted anything inspired by Gandhi. He said, yeah, I have thought about it, but and the matter rested. After about a year and a half, one day when I land up there, I see him painting. And it was an abstract thing, not much of geometry. And as he finished it, he asked for me. I was in my room, so I came out, and he then said, Ashok, his last words were, "Hey Ram." I said, yes. He said, no. So I want to write that. Now that was the beginning of, so he started from the end, in a manner of speaking, with Gandhi was shot dead and these were the things. And then, when he had done about 4 or 5 paintings in that
the Gandhi
Satya
and
and Ahimsa, Vaishnav Janto Tene Kahiye, and Sabko Sanmati De Bhagwan, etc. Then he said to me, but why should I paint Gandhi? Why can't I just put his words? Now, I said, well, you can do that if you like. He said, why don't you select some sayings? So, I had a book at home of Gandhiji's quotations. So I came the next day and I told him to read out several, and then he picked up. And they were all in English, and he had never put anything in Roman or English or French
so far on his
canvases. So he said, no, this has to be in Hindi. So there's no problem, I translate. So I sat down and translated.
Okay.
That's how one of them
the Swadharma.
And mind you, he was more than 90 already. He would sit down on the floor and very meticulously write down in his own hand. And he sort of, then he said, okay, I want to also paint one for Vinoba Bhave. He has great fascination for Vinoba Bhave. So I said, fine. So he said, there's this something about Swadharma. So then he selected
That.
it. He had this in his diary. So he took it out
He had noted it earlier.
earlier. So his it is he did a whole painting for the first time, I think, when he painted a Nirala, the whole verse of Nirala in praise of Saraswati. Then he did a whole verse by me, Ao. Then he did a whole verse, but in my case there was also painting. But in case of Nirala, it was just Nirala's words. Then he did the Tulsidas. Keshav kahi na jaye ka kahiye. The whole thing. Nothing else except. So he was able to, in a manner of speaking, give word dignity. I think I know of no other painter who has given such dignity,
respect to the words,
and respect to words, poetic words, as also other elements.
Also, I feel when you say that they have their own autonomous space, like that itself is so respectful, because normally when you mix two things, it's not necessarily they stand their ground.
That's true.
And it's always one always overtaking the other.
The aesthetics, illustration was ruled out.
Yes.
He would not illustrate. The painting was not illustrating.
Yes.
And the words were not supposed to be about the painting or indicate the two
stood their own spaces.
And create a creative tension between themselves. The more discerning, the more attentive, the more reflective would feel that tension. For the rest, it did not matter.